Hello, this video is in response to a question that we had in class about cruds and where do the get and post go in a create and a search. And we're going to go through HTTP in a bit more detail. First, let's take a step back. There's ISO, there's the Internet Engineering Task Force, and there's RFCs. These are important because you're going to hear about RFCs if you get down to the HTTP level. ISO stands for International Standards Organization, and it's a worldwide federation of standards bodies. Kind of think of the World Health Organization for health, synonymous. Within the ISO, there's the Engineering Task Force, or the IETF, and it's a standards development organization, global, for Internet protocols. Within the IETF, there's a way to create different protocols, and those are called creating request for comments. It's strange to me that it never goes beyond a request for comment, even though it becomes final, but that's just how it's always worked, and I think they've never tried to go back and change it. So there's a protocol out there called RFC 9112, and that defines the version 1.1 of the HTTP protocol. It includes the protocol itself, the message syntax, the routing, and the semantics of the header. I want to mention the 7 layers of the network stack. Chances are, if you have a technical background, you've heard of this. If not, I just wanted to mention it so you've heard of it. Down here you have the transport layer, the media layers, and those are the very technical layers. Is it Ethernet? Is it cellular? Have you ever noticed that you can be on a VoIP, a voice over IP call inside your house, you go outside and it switches to cellular? That's because these layers are separate from the layers above it. So in theory, each one of these 7 layers, and it starts from the very most basic to the highest layer, is completely separate from the lower layers. That's not quite true, but this is a conceptual model. So you've got the lower layers down here, and then up here you have the host layers. Up here at the very highest layer, you've got HTTP. HTTP, in fact, includes some of the things at the presentation layer, such as encoding of the data, data compression, decryption, encryption, because it gives it the keys to tell the lower layers what to do. It includes sessions. So for example, if you're sending out a message and you're expecting to get a response, they don't need to be synchronized because there's too much going on the internet. And so HTTP covers how to manage sessions. I sent you some information. I'm waiting for a response for you. As the sender, how do I know that the response that I get back went to that particular request that I sent to you? So it connects those sessions together. And then finally, at the transport layer, it breaks everything up into smaller chunks. Those chunks are managed by a protocol called TCP/IP, which is also covered by an RFC. I believe it's like 1122 or something like that. And so HTTP relies on TCP/IP. Now, I've never heard of HTTP running on top of anything other than TCP/IP, but theoretically it's possible. Okay, let's go back to RFC 9112. All right, if you look up, and you can go look it up yourself, if you go look up the HTTP spec, which is in this particular document, it will tell you what goes into the header. So it tells you that the header consists of 3 lines at a minimum. The most basic HTTP request consists of 3 lines. It requests, the first line is called the request line, and it's the method. SP stands for single space. The request target, so that's within the server. Where am I going to go within the server? We're going to get to the server in just a minute. So the method, space, target, space, and the version of HTTP that you're using. Then the next line is going to be the host. Tell me which host, and it's going to default to the typical internet port number. And then the final one that's required is that you have to tell it what type of codings that you can send or accept. Actually, most of the time, for simple transmissions, you're going to go with the star, which means anything. But let's go take a look at this in more detail. This very first thing, the method. The method is the get and the post, and a bunch of other things. I have to be honest with you, I didn't even know some of these existed until I started doing this slide set. But the ones that you're going to see the most often are get and post, and occasionally put, sometimes delete. So how do you get this actual method into this line? Okay, it's really easy. It goes into the header, the HTTP request. So this is the header of the HTTP. This has nothing to do with FHIR. This is only HTTP. So the request is going to be a get, single space, where you're going to go on the server, single space, and then the version, which is written like this, and this particular version is 1.1. The second line is going to be the host, And here we're going to example.com. Chances are that'd be happy, or something else, along with the rest of where you're going to pick up the executable. So in this particular example, you would actually put, I think it's /R4. And then what type of encoding do you want? So how are you going to encrypt or decrypt the information? What are you going to use for that? In this particular example, they're using zip. For the happy server, we use star because we're not really doing very much encryption. But this is it. This is what an HTTP header looks like, is these, at its simplest state, is these 3 lines. Let's look at that in a little bit more detail. All right, so how do you create an HTTP header? If you're using Postman, Postman is a utility by software developers and by people who test software systems. I really like Postman. I think it's very useful. We don't cover Postman, with the exception of Module 7, too much in this class because it's pretty technical, and it's typically used by a hardcore software developer or tester. It's how you prototype APIs. So I pulled up Postman, and all I did is, so here's the very first bar, and here's my URL right here, right? So I'm going to the Sim Hackathon Fire server. I'm going to look for an imaging study resource where subject equals patient SimJoe. So I pull this down, and if I want to do a get versus a post, here's how I put this into the header really simply, is just select the method that I want. So that's how this is done in Postman. I just select the method from the dropdown, and it figures out the formatting for me. If I go one more level of detail into Postman, across the top here, I can select the different sections of the HTTP header. Of the HTTP protocol, and build it myself. So I can go to the header, and by clicking things on and off, I can put different things into the header. So you can see that we have the host here. It says calculated when a request is sent. Well, that's because I put it into the URL up here. We have accept. Here it'll accept anything in response. So here I just left the default, which was star. And here's your accept recording that we just discussed. So if it's going to accept some different encoding types, we have to tell it which ones that we can interpret. And then the connection is called keep alive. Don't worry about that. And I had to give it an API key for security. Now for a get, I went over to here. So that was the header. So for a get, I went over to here and I clicked on body because I just wanted to show you what goes into the body of an HTTP header for a get. And you'll notice when I click on it, the answer is nothing, which makes sense because we're asking for information. Now let's talk about a post. Actually, that should say post. So you can see here that I selected a post. Ignore the fact that I put over here. And you can see that we're going to the Happy Fire server, and our intent is to create a patient. Now I didn't select the header because it's the exact same thing, but I did select the body here, and I want to show you that within the body, now there's all of this information, which is JSON object for a patient resource. So for a post, it goes into the body. Header's pretty similar. How do you do this programmatically? In Python, it's actually pretty trivial. There's a library in Python called request, so you have to install the library, and then you have to import the library, and then there's different methods within the request library. And you can see that they depend upon the HTTP method. So here I'm going to create a response object called R, and I'm going to send it to the request library, but I'm going to call specifically the get method. Here I'm going to call the post method. Here are all the other methods. So you can see that how you set the HTTP method within the request library in Python is you just call a different method, and it's going to put that information into the header in the correct format for you. So you don't actually need to know how to do it within the HTTP header. And then each of these method in turns, there's additional documentation pages which tell you exactly what the arguments are to build the correct header for you. So how about experimenting? As a task for you to take home, consider creating a Python application which will do a simple post to the Happy Fire server because you don't have to worry about security. Create an object and then check the object, return object for the status of 201, and you will determine whether or not your post was successful. Please continue to ask questions, whether in class or on the students' Q&A section. Thanks and have a great day.